First, for the last 40 years, things have been heating up in Centralia, Pennsylvania. The town's economy isn't booming. In fact, there's hardly any commerce happening there at all. But Centralia's real estate market is red hot anyway, in spite of the fact it's probably the last place in North America where you'd want to own a piece of land.
Welcome to what's left of Centralia, Pennsylvania.
It's pretty hot. And at depth, probably down at the level of the coal seam, you might see temperatures on the order of 1,100, 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, where there's active burning in the coal seam.
Steve Jones is a geologist with the state government. The water spraying trick is what he uses to dramatize how hot the ground is here. Evidence of an underground inferno that's been burning for 40 years.
That's pretty hot. Not a very pretty picture. Most of the surface expression of the fire within currently the 450 acres that's burnt or burning looks an awful lot like this.
Not a pretty sight. That's a civil servant's gift for understatement. Up top, there is a denuded landscape. Underneath, fires smolder and rage in a coal mine complex that covers 12 square kilometers. In the beginning, there was coal, enough coal and oil to make Pennsylvania a kind of 19th century version of Saudi Arabia. Rich veins that run kilometers deep in the rock or just erupt in black mountains dotting the countryside. In 1962, Centralia was a prosperous mining town of 1,100, smack dab on top of seams of the richest coal of all, anthracite. Now it's practically a ghost town. Just 11 people live here. But once there was a school, 4 movie theaters, 7 bars, and a gas station. This was a blue-collar community, the kind that puts down long roots. In the cemetery, there are freshly tended graves. In the spring of '62, town workers were burning a little excess garbage in a landfill behind the cemetery, as they often did during spring cleanup. Unbeknownst to them, they picked a spot where coal was right near the surface, and it ignited. The blaze was on, and it would burn down through a maze of tunnels to a depth of 100 meters. David DeCock is a reporter who's written a book about the Centralia fire.
It burned down and ignited this coal and then burned its way down into this vast network of abandoned mines beneath the town.
Coal is simply combustible sedimentary rock formed from the remains of plant life. There are several grades. The purest and least common is called anthracite. It's used to fuel the coke ovens that produce steel. Anthracite burns longer and produces more heat than the other grades of coal. It's hard to ignite, but once it's lit, it's difficult to extinguish. Cave-ins and fractures make the mine impossible to seal off. Long-abandoned tunnels like this one in nearby Ashland ensure enough oxygen to fuel the flames for at least another 100 years. In untold kilometers of mine shafts, the fire burns out of control. The advancing flames toast the next section of ore along the seam, heating it to ignition.
2 of the hazards that accompany the fire front moving through an area are sinkholes, and the second one are the gases.
In Centralia, the hills are alive with the smell of sulfur.
I think you can smell some of the rotten egg odor right now, and that's hydrogen sulfide gas coming off the burning coal. There are also carbon dioxide and a whole host of ethanes and methanes and pentanes and things like that coming off in much smaller quantities.
The heat is intense enough to produce ripples in the air. Jones and his assistant monitor the ground temperature.
We're at about 447 degrees Celsius right now, and that probe's only in the ground about a foot.
We conducted our own experiment to illustrate the extreme surface heat. We found a hot spot and left a pair of old shoes while Jones continued his tour.
The roads actually subsided from clear up around the curve up there, where the Buck Mountain Seam outcrops, clear down through this area And down well beyond Tim there, you can see undulations in the roadway down there, probably another 150 yards.
The old road into town looks like it's been hit by an earthquake. It's so hot, for kicks, people burn logs in the huge cracks in the asphalt. Many of the coal seams below ground run at steep angles or pitches, so when they burn, the ground above collapses. It's called subsidence, and anything on the surface can fall into the pit, including buildings, cars, and trees.
The road is actively subsiding. Subsidence cave-in. For the technical amongst us, we like subsidence. The pitch of the seam in this particular area, that's the dip of the seam, is very steep. It's probably something on the order of 45 or 50 degrees. So it's very, very easy to lose a lot of material down the steep pitch in the mine.
Back at our shoe experiment, after 20 minutes, the shoes have melted into a bubbling mass of oozing goo. State and federal authorities took years to mobilize here, and all attempts to put out the fire have failed.
It wasn't exactly they stood by, but they found a million bureaucratic excuses not to do the job right. You know, they didn't have a good funding source, so they couldn't provide enough money to do the job right. There were some problems in executing the attempts to put out the fire that they did carry out, and it just went on and on. The fire just kept getting bigger and bigger.
They tried digging up the coal around the burn site, but gave up when the fire spread faster than they could dig. The fire jumped makeshift firewalls. There were too many tunnels to flood. An engineering assessment in the 1980s said that only digging out the whole 3,000-acre coal field would stop the fire. The cost estimate then? Over $600 million. And that was more than U.S. governments were willing to commit to finish the job. Because of the threats of hydrogen explosions, carbon monoxide, and cave-ins, most residents were relocated. But the town's mayor, now 85 years old, has refused to move. He's hung in despite the devastation just up the street from his house.
They figure we're crazy to stay here. There's never been a fatality. There's never been a property damaged by that fire.
And once the people were out of there, the health department really didn't have an interest in continuing the monitoring.
Now, for the first time in over 2 decades, researchers are studying emissions here. Beyond the carbon compounds that come with burning fossil fuels, they're finding heavy metals, lead, arsenic, mercury, even traces of uranium, all naturally occurring in the ground. But this same research team is also looking for signs of life in the desolate landscape, searching for new leads on tiny organisms like bacteria that may help dispose of toxins or treat disease. Tools of hope from Ground Zero in Centralia.
Tomorrow we'll show you how scientists are scouring the land in and around Centralia in the hopes of unlocking some of the rugged defenses employed there by bacteria.